Why do we doom scroll? There's so many of us, Adam, that come home from work, you cook dinner, you've got kids, you're married, you're doing all the stuff, you're packing up the backpacks, you're cleaning up the dishes, you're letting the dog out, you're hopefully like having a moment of quiet yourself, and you say to yourself, I'm going to go to bed early tonight, or I'm going to work on that project, and next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by, and you've just wasted your evening doom scrolling. Why do we do that?
Yeah, there's this interesting theory about gambling that I think a lot of people have this naive idea that when people are gambling, they're just like, this is amazing and this is so much fun and I'm getting all this feedback. And then I hit a jackpot. People don't gamble because that's true. They gamble because they get into this kind of trance. Like there's something about sitting in front of a slot machine that is deeply soothing and numbing. And that's what the screen does. At the end of a hard day, what you don't want is to be massively excited most of the time. You're exhausted. You just want to have this kind of comfort, this lull. It's like taking a bath in the screen. And it brings this sense of comfort and reliability. And I'm nothing is being asked of me. I don't have to do anything. I just move my phone, move my finger, and that's all I have to do.
It sounds so lovely.
It sounds lovely, right? And what else gives us that sort of really uncomplicated dose of calm at the end of a long day? Very little. Alcohol, that's the other option. And so there aren't that many options. It's substances or it's screens, and many of us just turn to screens. So that's, I think, what's happening for most of us.
I hate that you put it like that.
Yeah, I don't love that it's true, but I think that's what's going on.
How do you stop?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think the biggest thing when we try to stop doing something is we don't replace it with something else. So the first thing to think about is, if I want to stop doing this thing, whatever this thing is, whether it's drinking, using a substance, scrolling through TikTok, whatever it is, when you would have done that thing, there needs to be something else there, and preferably something else that you enjoy that's not bad for you. Something that you feel better about doing. And that's going to be different for everyone. You've got to cultivate that habit, that change. And so just saying, I'm going to not do this thing and I'm going to use my willpower, no one has that much willpower.
Right.
That's exhausting. You can't expect yourself to be superhuman. But figure out what else you could be doing that's more enriching, but that also makes you feel good, and do that other thing. Plaster over that gap.
This is a pathetic question. But given that you are the renowned guy that is doing the research on this, do you have some suggestions? Because even my first thought was, I've been addicted to, I shouldn't say addicted. I've been loving this fantasy audiobook, Court of Thorn and Roses. I am living in a different land, and it's on my phone. I think about, I could just slump on the couch and watch something on TV. There's another screen.
Yeah.
So in the research, or in just kind of really digging into this topic, are there things that have come up that could offer just a spark of a suggestion for those of us that would really like to not have this be a habit and not be lulled every night into giving our evenings away to our phone?
Yeah, so I'll say one thing. I think this is a good moment to say that screens are not one thing, right? It's not like looking at a screen is automatically a bad thing.
Right.
You could be reading a really enriching book on the screen, and that's great. It makes you feel good. Or you could be watching a show or a documentary or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with spending hours in front of the TV at the end of the night if that's mindfully what you want to be doing with your time. There's also nothing wrong with briefly scrolling through a social media platform. The problem is none of us have the willpower to just do it for 2 minutes.
Right.
So I don't think you have to find something that's not screen-based. You just have to find something that's not making you feel hollow and unhappy, that doesn't make you feel like you've kind of been robbed of your self-control and your agency. So if that means you're going to watch an episode of your favorite show on Netflix, and then you're going to go and read 5 chapters of your favorite book, and then you're going to have a conversation, and then you're going to try a new recipe that you wanted to cook, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter what it is. It just should be something that doesn't leave you feeling hollow. That's the only thing to ask yourself. Do I feel better, happier, like my life is more meaningful after this? Or do I feel worse off, like I'm empty? And that's what people say when they spend huge amounts of time scrolling. They feel kind of empty. So just find something else, even if it's on a screen, that doesn't leave you feeling that way.
It's true. I do feel empty.
Yeah.
And it then makes you feel stupid for wasting that much time. And if you add it up cumulatively over the years, it's a large part of your life.
20 years.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
20 years of your life is spent just scrolling on your phone?
Looking at your phone. It'll be about, for most of us, 20 years on average, something like that. 15 to 20 years. We'll be doing this, just looking at 20-second videos. Yeah.
Dr. Alter, I mean, as a researcher, what do you think when you hear that figure?
Well, I think one thing to think is, imagine it's the end of your life. You've hopefully lived a very fulfilling, long life. You get to that point and then someone says, would you like 20 extra years? And the answer is no, I'd rather have spent 20 years scrolling mindlessly. No one's going to say that. So I think if the first step to fixing this problem is having people say, I really want to change this, that to me is a good place to begin. That idea that you are shortening your life effectively by 20 years or 15 years or however long it ends up being, because you spend all this time consuming sort of eye candy, mental candy by scrolling. I think almost everyone would say, when you zoom back, assuming you have the self-control, I think there are better things I could be doing with that time. Maybe I'll save a year or two for the scrolling, but then that leaves me still 15, 18 years to do other things.
You just basically dropped a grenade on any excuse that somebody would have that they don't have time, or it's too late, or I couldn't possibly fit this thing in, because you have all this found time. Yeah. Is there a difference between the screen on your phone and the screen on the television in terms of the impact to your brain?
Yeah. So, the way you interact with those screens is very different, right?
How so?
So when you watch TV content, it's just something that's kind of being visited upon you. You're not interacting with it.
Yep.
So there are good and bad parts to interacting with a screen. If you're learning a language, you're going to learn it less well on a TV than on a phone, because you can interact with the phone.
Okay.
If you are using a social media platform, no one uses that social media on a screen like a TV, because you can't have that bi-directional relationship where you act on the thing and then it acts back on you.
Right.
That's critical. That's what goes on phones that make it so immersive. So a TV screen is less kind of weaponized to draw our time and attention away from us. It gives us a little bit more agency. That doesn't mean it's perfect. If you're watching a show, there's a cliffhanger and someone says to you, just sit here for 10 seconds, the next episode will begin. That's where binge viewing comes from, and we almost all do that.
Right.
But what we do with our screens when we're on phones is, I think, much more difficult for us to resist.
I think I just got something that I'd never thought about before, Dr. Alter, which is that your brain is getting so many fast signals and messages, from the ads to the pop-ups to the notifications to you yourself switching between the texting and the email and search. And what is getting fused together is a brain that now is constantly expecting this go, go, go. And I had not thought about the fact that, because if you're using your phone and you can interact with it, so now you've also got your hands involved, and there's that whole body of research around neurobics and marrying the physical movement, and particularly movements of your hands, with new thought patterns, and how that fires and wires your brain quicker. Like, that to me makes so much sense, that because you're actually typing and you're interacting with it, you're programming your brain faster almost to expect short form. I hear people also talking anecdotally, like there's a rise in ADHD, but it's actually a rise in your brain getting trained to be distracted. Yeah.
So I think what's happened is we live in an age of time contraction. Everything happens in really brief chunks. Everything's 5 seconds long, 10 seconds long. It's time is contracted. If you go on a vacation to a beach and you spend a week doing nothing, you get time dilation. Time suddenly works on a different scale. You think of 5 minutes as no time at all. Whereas in the way we live our lives, many of us, most of the time, 5 minutes, you could do 100 things. You could look at 100 videos. There are a million things you could do in 5 minutes. And that creates a sense of massive urgency. For what purpose, I don't know. Probably not a good one for most of us, most of the time. So I think there's some value in changing the scale of things, in going for a 4-hour drive. I drove 12 hours there and back to see the eclipse.
Where'd you go?
I went to northern Vermont. And it was incredible. I drove 6 hours with a friend.
Yeah.
We got out of the car for 5 minutes, watched the eclipse, got back in and drove home. So it was 12 hours of driving for 3 minutes of magic. But the one really interesting thing that was several days ago now, was it changed how I feel about time. There's a hangover period where I'm like, a few hours, no problem. Not a problem at all. I can focus on things for a few hours. I did it for 12 hours the other day. when do we ever do one thing for 12 hours? It's just very rare. So I think doing things that are extended and protracted is really valuable because it resets what you think of as a kind of meaningful chunk of time.
Well, and this goes back to something that you also talked about, which is I guarantee that those 5 minutes that you probably spent at Burke Mountain, right? Up in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
That there was something about those 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours.
Yeah.
And you use the word time dilation, which means that you're stretching your own perception of being in the moment. And you gave us a list of things like being in nature, having plants or some sort of water element in your house, meditation, a conversation with somebody where you're really in the moment is a way for you to actually slow down time.
Yes.
And get important time back.
Right.
So you also have this research that's very interesting. It's this concept called stopping cues. What does that mean?
Yeah, so stopping cues, if you think about how we consumed information in the 20th century and the early 21st, everything had a natural endpoint to it. These are known as stopping cues. So you'd read a book and you'd get to the end of a chapter or the whole book. You'd watch a TV show, the credits would roll.
Yes.
These were all gentle signals that you probably wanted to do something different. Move on to the next thing. And they were built into everything we did. So those are called stopping cues. Now, the thing about a lot of the tech we use is that tech companies have systematically eradicated those stopping cues. They've removed them. They've weeded them out. So the bottomless feed that you get on social media platforms, that is a good example of the absence of stopping cues. So because we are humans who are creatures of inertia, we just keep doing the same thing over and over until something pushes us to the next thing. In the absence of a cue that says, hey, maybe you want to move on to the next thing, we just keep going. And that's a lot of why once we start using a social media platform, there's no cue to move on. The same way when you're on a slot machine, there's no cue to move on. So we just keep going.
20 years of your life is spent just scrolling on your phone?
Looking at your phone. It'll be about, for most of us, 20 years on average.
Wait, what?
Yeah.